Mercy, mercy, mercy.
This past week I was working on a video to compare the Divine Mercy devotion to the Abba Father devotion. And during the course of my preparation I was reading Sister Faustina's diary. And I came across this description of Sister Faustina's vision of hell, which starts on paragraph 159. Today I was led by an angel to the chasms of hell. It is a place of great torture. How awesomely large and extensive it is. The kinds of torture I saw: the first torture that constitutes hell is the loss of God. The second is perpetual remorse of conscience. The third is that one's condition will never change. The fourth is that the fire will penetrate the soul without destroying it. A terrible suffering, since it is purely spiritual fire lit by God's anger. The fifth torture is continual darkness and a terrible suffocating smell, and despite the darkness, the devils and the souls of the damned see each other and all of the evil, both the others and their own. The sixth torture is the constant company of Satan. The seventh torture is a horrible despair, hatred of God, vile words, curses, and blasphemies. So people who believe that this devotion was inspired by God probably think this is all original stuff. But as I read the diary, it dawned on me that I had read this, or something very much like it, before somewhere else. And then I remembered that I had read this decades ago as a student. It was in James Joyce's Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. And this book was just a novel, and James Joyce was an apostate from the one true faith. But let's compare what Sister Faustina wrote in the 1930s to what James Joyce wrote 20 years earlier, before Sister Faustina. James Joyce originally wrote, "The fires of punishment torture the spirit with the flesh." And then Sister Faustina subsequently wrote, "It is a place of great torture." James Joyce wrote, "Leagues upon leagues of glowing fires." Sister Faustina wrote, "How awesomely large." James Joyce wrote, "This then, to be separated forever from its greatest good, from God, and to feel the anguish of that separation, knowing full well that it is unchangeable. This is the greatest torment which this created soul is capable of bearing." Sister Faustina then wrote, "The first torture that constitutes hell is the loss of God." James Joyce originally wrote, "Hell consists of the foul demons who are made in hell the voices of conscience. They taunt us. Why did you sin?" Sister Faustina then wrote, "The second is the perpetual remorse of conscience." James Joyce wrote, "What name then shall we give to the darkness of hell, which is to last not for 3 days alone, but for all of eternity?" Sister Faustina wrote, "The third is that one's condition will never change." James Joyce wrote, "Our earthly fire destroys at the same time as it burns, so that the more intense it is, the shorter is its duration. But the fire of hell has this property, that it preserves that which it burns." Sister Faustina then wrote, "The fourth is that the fire will penetrate the soul without destroying it." James Joyce first wrote, "Glowing fires kindled in the abyss by the offended majesty of the omnipotent God, and fanned into everlasting and ever-increasing fury by the breath and anger of the Godhead." Sister Faustina wrote, "A terrible suffering, since it is purely spiritual fire, lit by God's anger." James Joyce wrote, "It is a never-ending storm of darkness, dark flames and dark smoke." Sister Faustina wrote, "The fifth torture is continual darkness." James Joyce originally wrote, "The horror of this strait and dark prison is increased by its awful stench. The very air of this world, that pure element, becomes foul and unbreathable when it has been long enclosed." Sister Faustina then wrote, "The fifth torture is continual darkness and a terrible suffocating smell." James Joyce first wrote, "The torment of this infernal prison is increased by the company of the damned themselves." Sister Faustina wrote, "The devils and the souls of the damned see each other and all of the evil, both of the others and their own." James Joyce first wrote, "Consider the frightful torment to those damned souls, tempters and tempted alike, of the company of the devils." And Sister Faustina wrote, "The sixth torture is the constant company of Satan." James Joyce wrote, "But they are helpless and hopeless." Sister Faustina wrote, "The seventh torture is a horrible despair." James Joyce wrote, "The mouth of the damned are full of blasphemies against God and of hatred for their fellow sufferers, and of curses against those souls which were their accomplices in sin. Faustina then wrote, hatred of God, vile words, curses, and blasphemies. So these two versions of hell are substantially the same, though James Joyce is definitely a much better writer. Did Sister Faustina either read or hear the novel and then copy it? Maybe, but maybe not. You see, James Joyce was just writing a description of hell that he had heard from priests tell him when he was younger. In fact, in his novel, it's a priest who is a character providing the detailed description of hell. And Sister Faustina was doing the exact same thing as James Joyce. With her so-called vision, she was just repeating what she had heard before, which was, and still is, the popular conception of hell. And we see a similar description of hell in St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa. Sister Faustina's diary is full of the repetition of concepts that she heard elsewhere. And we recently saw the same thing with our video on Garabandal. And we'll soon see that when we discuss the Abba Father devotion. And these false visions just repackage the same stuff that the so-called seers heard elsewhere. And when they do venture into something original, they inevitably stumble into heretical concepts or they make predictions that never come true. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back again within a week with another one. But in the meantime, please check out my Facebook page and my Twitter page. Every day I post additional content that you won't find on this YouTube channel. And also, please pray for the church.
Mercy, mercy, babe. Ooh, Lord, have mercy on me. I've done somebody wrong. Have mercy